Picture this. You're having the time of your life at a beach party, surrounded by friends, music pumping through your veins, and the ocean breeze cooling your skin. Fast forward 6 hours and you wake up in a stranger's clothes, in a bush, over an hour away from where you started, with absolutely no memory of how you got there. Your phone, wallet, and keys are gone. Your shoes are soaking wet, but you don't smell like water. And the worst part, your friend experienced the exact same thing at the exact same time. This isn't fiction. This actually happened. And by the end of this story, you'll understand why sometimes the scariest experiences are the ones that never get explained. Tonight, I'm going to take you through 2 deeply unsettling true stories that will make you question everything about trust, safety, and the randomness of danger. These aren't your typical ghost stories or urban legends. These are real accounts from real people who found themselves in situations that defy logical explanation. Stories that will make you rethink every decision you make when the sun goes down. Stories that prove sometimes the most terrifying monsters aren't supernatural at all. They're human. And they're hunting. Before we dive in, I need you to understand something. These stories don't have neat endings. There are no satisfying conclusions where everything gets wrapped up with a bow. Real horror rarely works that way. Real horror lives in the unanswered questions, the gaps in memory, the what-ifs that keep you awake at 3 in the morning. And that's exactly what makes these stories so deeply disturbing. So get comfortable, turn up the volume, and prepare yourself for an hour of true terror that will stay with you long after the final word is spoken. Story 1, The Jersey Shore Incident. Let me tell you about my friend Jimmy. We go way back, and I mean way back. 20+ years of friendship, practically brothers at this point. Jimmy has built something really impressive in the last couple years. He runs a company that hosts high-profile electronic music events all along the East Coast, primarily in New Jersey and New York. We're talking major venues, the kinds of clubs everyone knows about, the places that define nightlife in whatever city they're located in. And Jimmy doesn't just book any talent. He brings in legitimate names, borderline famous DJs who pack venues to capacity, the kind of performers who charge 5 figures just to show up. Because of our long history together, Jimmy extends an incredible privilege to me and our other hometown friends. We get to come to these events completely free, and not just free admission. We get VIP treatment, access to the talent, the works. It's the kind of thing I probably don't express enough gratitude for, looking back. These events aren't small operations either. They're professionally organized productions with lighting, sound systems, and production value that rival concerts. Jimmy has worked his way up in this industry through pure hustle and networking, and watching his success has been genuinely inspiring. So when Jimmy announced he was hosting a massive 4th of July weekend event at the Jersey Shore, naturally all our mutual friends were planning to attend. This wasn't just another show. This was being positioned as their biggest event yet, a career-defining moment for Jimmy and his team. The lineup was stacked with multiple DJs. The venue was one of the most prestigious clubs on the shore, and the anticipation was building for weeks. Jimmy asked if I wanted to come down early with him to help with setup, and obviously I jumped at the opportunity. Our other friend Ryan was also coming along for the ride, so the 3 of us piled into a car and made the hour-and-a-half drive down to the shore. We arrived at the venue about 4 hours before doors were scheduled to open. Jimmy and his team immediately got to work with setup, coordinating with the venue staff, doing sound checks, making sure every detail was perfect. Ryan and I, on the other hand, didn't have much to contribute to the technical side of things. We were essentially just along for the ride, which left us with several hours to kill. That's when we discovered one of the better perks of Jimmy's arrangement with the venue. His team was entitled to unlimited complimentary drinks, and by extension, so were his guests. Ryan and I looked at each other with that knowing grin, the one that says we're about to make some questionable decisions. And that's exactly what we did. We started drinking well before the first attendees even arrived. By the time the doors opened and the first DJ started their set, Ryan and I were already more than a little buzzed. Actually, that's putting it mildly. We were getting pretty drunk, but it was 4th of July weekend, we reasoned. This was exactly the kind of occasion that justified a little excessive celebration. We're both grown men who can handle our alcohol, so we weren't worried about embarrassing ourselves or getting sick. We just wanted to have a good time, let loose, enjoy the music and the atmosphere. As the night progressed, we kept that momentum going. More drinks, more dancing, more immersion in the electric energy of the event. The venue was absolutely packed, bodies moving in synchronization to the bass-heavy beats, lights stroking across the crowd creating this almost hypnotic effect. This was Jimmy's element, and you could see the pride on his face as he watched his event unfold exactly as planned. Ryan and I were having the time of our lives, at least from what I can actually remember. The alcohol consumption had reached a level that I honestly hadn't experienced since then, not even close. As the night wore on and the event started winding down, people began facing that universal late-night dilemma. You either figure out how you're getting home, or you figure out who you're going home with, or ideally both. Jimmy had already solved the first problem for us by renting an Airbnb nearby with enough beds for everyone. So Ryan and I were set on accommodations. But the second question, well, that's where things get interesting. And by interesting, I mean where this story takes a very dark turn. Ryan and I made our way over to the bar area, still riding that intoxicated confidence that makes you feel like you can talk to anyone. We spotted 2 women who we found attractive and decided to shoot our shot. We introduced ourselves and started up a conversation. I'm probably butchering their names given my state at the time, but I'm fairly certain they introduced themselves as Gianna and Marcella. Neither Ryan nor I are male models by any stretch, but we do have one thing working in our advantage, especially in Jersey Shore territory. We're both over 6 feet tall. Now, I know this might sound shallow, but there's a genuine demographic reality about the Jersey Shore that works in favor of taller guys. The vast majority of men in that area tend to be shorter than average, for whatever reason. So being tall becomes an even bigger advantage than it normally is. And for reasons I still don't fully understand, height seems to be the primary attribute that women in that area prioritize. Not looks, not physique, not intelligence or sense of humor, but height. I've never been able to wrap my head around it, but I'm not complaining. It worked in our favor that night. The conversation flowed easily at first. These women seemed genuinely interesting, surprisingly intelligent based on our discussions. They weren't just talking about typical nightlife small talk. They were bringing up topics that required actual thought and knowledge. I remember feeling refreshed by the intellectual depth of the conversation, thinking how rare it was to have substantive discussions with people you meet at clubs. Usually, it's all surface-level garbage, the same boring questions and observations. But this felt different. These women seemed educated, worldly, like they came from money based on how they were dressed. That's when things started getting a bit hazy in my memory. From this point forward, there are gaps, moments that don't connect quite right. But here's what I can piece together. It was actually Marcella who suggested that the 4 of us leave together and continue partying elsewhere. Ryan and I obviously weren't going to object to that proposal. Then something unexpected happened. Gianna handed each of us a drink and insisted we get on their level before heading out, even though Ryan and I had already consumed what was probably equivalent to her body weight in alcohol. I know the dynamic of women buying drinks for men sounds unusual, and it definitely is. But these women were clearly wealthy, based on their designer clothes and jewelry, and the casual way they carried themselves. They had that unmistakable air of people accustomed to spending money without thinking twice about it. So we downed the drinks they'd given us. Looking back, this is the moment everything changed. This is the pivot point where a fun night out transformed into something much darker. But in that moment, we had no reason to be suspicious. We were drunk, we were having fun, and 2 attractive women wanted to continue spending time with us. The 4 of us started making our way toward the exit. The moment we stepped outside into the warm July air, Marcella made another suggestion. She said we should go back to her place instead of our airbnb. She explained that her house was actually very close by, and better yet, it was right on the beach. This surprised me a little bit. In my experience, it's usually the guys who host in situations like this. But both women insisted that Marcella's beach house would be significantly nicer than whatever inland airbnb we had rented for the night. And honestly, she had a valid point. A beach house definitely sounded better than some random rental property. Ryan didn't argue either. So we started walking along the beach, and I have to say, the conversation continued to be surprisingly engaging. These women weren't just pretty faces. They demonstrated genuine intelligence and knowledge about a wide range of topics. At one point, I actually felt embarrassed about how drunk I was because I felt like I couldn't articulate my thoughts properly. I was worried I looked like an idiot compared to how well-spoken they were. That's when I noticed something concerning. I was feeling drunker than I had been just 15 minutes earlier, and it wasn't the normal progression of intoxication. This was different. My body started feeling like it was melting under its own weight, like I might collapse at any second. My legs felt flimsy, almost like they were made of cardboard. Moving my limbs, mouth, even my eyes became increasingly difficult. There was a moment where my extremities started feeling numb, that pins and needles sensation, but more intense. But then, just as quickly as this feeling washed over me, it seemed to pass. I returned to what felt like normal drunkenness, at least temporarily. I chalked it up to having had too much to drink, to the alcohol finally catching up with me all at once. We arrived at the beach house, and I need to emphasize just how impressive this property was. Even in my heavily intoxicated state, I could tell this wasn't just a nice house. This was wealth on a completely different level. I'm probably exaggerating because of how drunk I was, but it genuinely looked like what I imagined a professional athlete's beach house would look like. This wasn't some modest summer rental. This was a showcase property, the kind of place you see featured in architecture magazines. We went inside, and after removing our shoes, found ourselves in what I'm assuming was a living room. I say assuming because the level of opulence and sophisticated design was so foreign to anything I'm accustomed to that I couldn't quite process it properly. The space was simultaneously decorative and minimalistic, which seems contradictory, but somehow it worked. There were actual sculptures on pedestals, the kind you'd see in an art gallery. But the space didn't feel cluttered or ostentatiously showy. Everything on display seemed to blend seamlessly into the architecture of the room, like they were natural extensions of the space itself, rather than additions. The furniture looked custom-made, probably costing more than my car. The color palette was carefully curated, everything coordinating in a way that felt intentional but not forced. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the beach, and even at night, you could see the ocean stretching out into darkness. I wished I had the presence of mind to take pictures, but my focus was elsewhere. My brain was struggling to process everything through the fog of alcohol and whatever else was affecting me. Ryan's mind was apparently elsewhere too, because within 15 minutes of entering the house, he and Marcella had disappeared somewhere into the maze of rooms and hallways. That left me alone with Gianna. The house suddenly felt very quiet despite its size. She moved closer to me, and then she leaned in to kiss me. And that's where my memory completely cuts off. Not the kiss itself, but her leaning in. That's the last frame of memory I have before everything goes dark. I don't remember feeling woozy again. I don't remember drinking more. I don't remember doing anything else. There's just a massive gap in my memory spanning several hours that will not return no matter how hard I try to recall it. And here's the thing that makes this truly disturbing. I know for a fact that I didn't simply pass out, because there's digital proof that I remained conscious. Later, when I got my phone back, I discovered texts sent from my phone during those missing hours. Texts that prove I was sentient and functional enough to unlock my phone, compose messages, and send them to multiple people. But I have absolutely zero recollection of doing any of it. The next thing I remember is waking up with the sun directly overhead, blazing down on me with that intense midday heat. I was lying in a random set of bushes, confused and disoriented in a way that went far beyond a normal hangover. My head was pounding, but it wasn't just the physical pain of too much alcohol. Everything felt wrong. My entire reality felt shifted, like waking up from anesthesia where nothing quite makes sense for those first few moments. I didn't immediately sit up. I just stared at the sky for a minute, trying to make sense of where I was and how I got there. That's when the panic started creeping in as I began taking inventory of my situation. I reached into my pocket for my phone. It wasn't there. I checked my other pockets. My wallet was gone too. My keys also missing. Every personal belonging I had on me the night before had vanished. But it gets significantly worse than that. I wasn't even wearing my own clothes. These were someone else's garments and not Ryan's either. A complete stranger's clothing. The only items that were actually mine were my shoes, and even those had been tampered with. Both shoes had their shoelaces completely removed and they were soaking wet, absolutely drenched. But here's what made no sense. I didn't smell like salt water or chlorine. If I had been in the ocean or a pool, there would be some trace of it, some smell that would indicate what kind of water I'd been in. But there was nothing. I finally sat up and looked around, trying to get my bearings. I was hoping to recognize something, anything that would give me a clue about my location. But there wasn't a single familiar landmark. This didn't look like a beach town at all. In fact, it looked like I was in a completely different type of area, more inland, more rural. The road ahead just curved away into more trees and vegetation. No businesses, no houses, no signs indicating what town this might be. The isolation was terrifying. But then just across the street, maybe a few hundred feet away, I spotted a 7-Eleven. It was genuinely the only structure in sight, standing there like an oasis in a desert. I stood up, which took more effort than it should have, and made my way across the street to the convenience store. My legs felt weak, my balance was off, and every step felt like I was fighting against my own body. When I entered the store, the employee behind the counter immediately looked at me with suspicion. I probably looked exactly like what I was, someone who had been through something terrible. I approached the counter and asked if I could use his phone, explaining that mine had been stolen. He stared at me for a long moment, probably debating whether I was running some kind of scam. But eventually, he slid his phone across the counter to me. The first number that came to my mind was my sister's. It was one of the few phone numbers I still had memorized, along with my parents', and there was absolutely no way I was calling my parents in this state. They would have freaked out, and I wasn't ready to deal with that conversation. My sister picked up immediately, and I tried my best to explain the situation. I told her I'd been at Jimmy's event, that something had happened, that I'd woken up in a random location without my phone or wallet, wearing someone else's clothes. I could hear the concern in her voice as she processed what I was telling her. She gave me Ryan's number, which I called several times in succession. No answer. That's when I started wondering if whatever happened to me had also happened to him. The thought that we might have both been targeted, drugged, robbed, and dumped in random locations was absolutely terrifying. I was just about to call the police when something surreal happened. Ryan walked into the same 7-Eleven. We just stood there staring at each other for a second, both of us looking rough. Both of us clearly having been through something traumatic. Then we greeted each other and he started telling me his version of events. And it was the same story, damn near identical. He had woken up in bushes wearing strangers' clothes with no phone, wallet, or keys. His shoes were also soaking wet with the laces removed. And he had the same gap in his memory, the same complete blackness covering several hours. That sealed it for both of us. This wasn't just bad luck or excessive drinking. Something deliberate had been done to us. We called the police right there, making sure to profusely thank the 7-Eleven employee for his help before the officers arrived. The police arrived within about 10 minutes, and Ryan and I stood outside the convenience store recounting our story to them. To their credit, they initially took everything we said seriously. They listened, took notes, asked clarifying questions. But as we provided more details, I noticed a shift in their demeanor. Their questions started turning from investigative to skeptical. Were we absolutely sure we hadn't just consumed too much alcohol? Was it possible we had wandered off on our own and passed out somewhere? They weren't directly accusing us of making things up, but it was becoming increasingly clear they weren't entirely convinced something criminal had occurred. I tried to explain the logical impossibility of what they were suggesting. How would we have drunkenly wandered into a town over an hour away by foot? That would require us to walk for hours in a straight line while completely intoxicated. And how would that explain the missing belongings, the different clothes, the wet shoes with missing laces, the perfectly synchronized timing of it all happening to both of us? I don't think they appreciated my logical pushback very much. I could see the annoyance registering on their faces. But then I had an idea. I gave them my sister's number and asked them to call her. I explained that she was already tracking my phone through Find My iPhone, and maybe that could provide some answers about where we'd been. The officers agreed and called her. To everyone's collective surprise, my phone was showing up in the middle of a random parking lot just a few minutes' drive away. The officers agreed to drive us to the location. We all piled into the police car, and sure enough, when we arrived at the parking lot, both our phones were sitting on the pavement right next to each other. Not hidden, not thrown away, just placed deliberately side by side on the ground. We were relieved to have our phones back, but this discovery only seemed to reinforce the police officers' theory that we had simply been drunk and irresponsible. They started suggesting that we probably hadn't been robbed at all, that we had just lost our wallets the same careless way we'd apparently lost our phones. Ryan and I tried desperately to convince them to investigate the house Marcella had taken us to, the one she claimed was hers. We explained that we could take them right to it, that there had to be evidence there, that something clearly wrong had happened in that location. But they weren't having it. They kept insisting we were probably just too intoxicated to remember things correctly. One officer even said, and I'll never forget this dismissive statement, "This kind of thing happens more often than you'd think." Then they handed us their business cards and told us to call if we remembered anything else. But the way they said it made it clear they didn't expect to hear from us again, that they considered this case closed before it ever really opened. What shocked me most was how reluctant they were to even connect us with other officers who might be more willing to help or take our story seriously. They essentially told us to find our own ride home since our phones were now charged and working. And then they just left us standing there in that parking lot. After the police left, I went through my phone for the first time to see what I could discover, and things got even more disturbing and bizarre. There were texts sent from me to numerous people I knew. Jimmy, my parents, several coworkers, even some women I had been casually talking to. And here's what made it so unsettling. All the messages sounded completely normal. They were things I might actually say if I'd had a calm, coherent night. The texts genuinely sounded like me, using my vocabulary, my typing style, my usual way of phrasing things. But from a continuity standpoint, when you looked at all the messages together, they didn't make any sense. They contradicted each other in ways that revealed whoever sent them wasn't actually me, or at least wasn't me in a normal state of mind. One message to Jimmy thanked him for the event and mentioned that Ryan and I had crashed at a buddy's place nearby. Another message to my dad said we were safe and had found a couch to sleep on at someone's apartment. There was a text to a woman I'd been talking to that said something casual about me hanging out at home and thinking about her. None of these texts aligned with each other. None of them reflected the actual reality of what had happened. It was like someone had carefully crafted messages designed to keep people from worrying or asking questions, but hadn't bothered to make sure the stories matched. Or maybe that person didn't care about consistency because they knew no one would compare the messages to each other. Whatever the explanation, it was deeply unsettling to read these messages and have absolutely no memory of writing them. I realized I had numerous missed calls and concerned texts from Jimmy. He'd been trying to reach us all morning, growing increasingly worried as hours passed without response. I called him immediately, and he answered sounding immensely relieved to hear my voice. He said he genuinely thought Ryan and I might have died or something terrible had happened. He told us to stay exactly where we were, that he'd come pick us up right away. While we waited for Jimmy, Ryan and I called our banks to cancel all our credit and debit cards. Interestingly, and this added another layer of mystery to the whole situation, none of our cards had been used. We checked the transaction history multiple times to make absolutely sure. Despite the fact that these cards had likely been in those women's possession for several hours, they hadn't made a single purchase or withdrawal. What kind of thieves go through the effort of drugging and robbing people, but then don't even attempt to use their credit cards? The entire ride home with Jimmy, Ryan, and I talked nonstop trying to make sense of what could have possibly happened. None of it added up. The pieces just didn't fit together into any coherent narrative. Yes, we had clearly been drugged. That much seemed obvious based on the memory loss, the strange physical sensations I'd felt, the synchronized timing of both of us being affected. But being drugged didn't explain everything else. It didn't explain the elaborate nature of what had been done to us. First of all, I wasn't aware of any drug that produces the specific effects we experienced. From everything I'd read about common date rape drugs like Rohypnol or GHB, they typically just make you fall asleep. But I hadn't fallen asleep. The text from my phone proved I was conscious and functional enough to use my device. I was apparently awake and moving around for hours, just with no ability to form memories. That suggests something more sophisticated than your typical club drug. And why would anyone go to such elaborate lengths just to rob two random guys? Especially if they weren't even going to attempt to use the credit cards they'd stolen. We're talking about a complex operation here. Drugging us, transporting us to a location over an hour away, changing our clothes, removing our shoelaces, getting our shoes wet, carefully placing our phones in a specific location, sending fake texts to cover their tracks. All of that effort and planning for what? To steal wallets they don't even use. Jimmy thought we might have been specifically targeted, but that didn't make sense either. Ryan and I had approached those women. They hadn't approached us. We'd been the ones to initiate the conversation at the bar. So how could they have targeted us specifically? Unless they were there waiting for any men to approach them, running some kind of operation where they targeted whoever took the bait. But even that explanation seemed like too much effort for too little reward, especially in such a risky location. And all of this still doesn't address the biggest mystery. How and why did we end up in a random town an hour away wearing other people's clothing? Who drove us there? Was it those women or were other people involved? Where did the clothes come from, and more disturbingly, what happened to our original clothes? As crazy as it sounds. Both Ryan and I actually checked ourselves for incisions, looking for any signs that someone might have surgically removed organs. We'd both heard stories about organ harvesting operations, but there was nothing. No cuts, no stitches, no unexplained marks on our bodies. Jimmy suggested that maybe they had just given us some exotic experimental drugs for reasons we couldn't understand. Maybe we were guinea pigs in some kind of illegal pharmaceutical testing. I guess that makes as much sense as anything else, though it still doesn't explain the transportation or the clothes. And it doesn't explain why someone other than those women must have been involved, because someone had driven us to that town, and someone had switched clothes with us. This wasn't a two-person operation. Ryan and I never got answers, but we didn't just forget about the whole thing and move on with our lives. We couldn't. This experience burrowed into our minds, creating questions that demanded investigation even though we knew we probably wouldn't find satisfactory conclusions. About 2 weeks after the incident, Ryan and I decided to drive all the way back to the Jersey Shore to search for that house. We needed to see it again, to confirm it was real, to maybe find some clue we'd missed. We tried our best to retrace our steps from that night, knowing that if we just walked along the boardwalk and beach, we'd eventually find the house since Marcella had said it was right on the water. And remarkably, we actually did find it. We recognized it immediately. That distinctive architecture, the size, the position right on the beach. There was no mistaking it. This was definitely the place. The two of us walked up the pathway to the front door, our hearts pounding with a mixture of anticipation and dread. I rang the doorbell and we waited. After a moment, an older man opened the door, looking at us with mild confusion and asking what we wanted. I did the talking, carefully choosing my words because I didn't want to reveal too much or potentially incriminate myself in something if this situation was more complicated than I understood. I simply asked him if a woman named Marcella lived at this address, or if he had a daughter or granddaughter who was around our age. He gave me a hard no, saying he lived there alone and had for years. I made up a quick cover story, telling him there had been some women who claimed to own this house when we'd met them at a bar, probably just trying to impress us. To my surprise, he actually found that story pretty funny, chuckling about how people will say anything to seem more important than they are. Then that was that. He wished us a good day and closed the door. I walked away from that house with the most unsettling feeling in the pit of my stomach. I can't even accurately describe it as fear. It was more like a deep, sickening discomfort, a visceral certainty that something truly awful had happened to me and my friend that night in that house, and we would never, ever get to the bottom of it. The knowledge would forever remain just out of reach, like trying to remember a dream that dissolves the moment you wake up. For a long time after that visit, I was convinced those women had been involved in something much larger and more sinister than Ryan, and I could even conceive. Maybe they were part of an organized operation, something with multiple moving parts and purposes we couldn't understand. Maybe they had been planning to kidnap or kill us and decided not to go through with it at the last second for whatever reason. Maybe we'd narrowly escaped something far worse than we realized. The possibilities haunted me. What if we'd said something or done something that night during our memory blackout that changed their minds about whatever they'd been planning? What if there were supposed to be 2 more victims added to some terrible statistic, but through sheer dumb luck, we'd been spared? Or what if the plan had gone exactly as intended, and we just didn't understand what had actually been done to us? I'll never have an update to this story. I've accepted that. The police aren't investigating, there are no leads to follow, and the women's identities remain a complete mystery. We don't even know if Gianna and Marcella were their real names. Probably not, given everything else. But if something related ever happens, if Ryan or I ever get even a shred of new information, I'll share it. This experience changed how I think about going out, about trusting strangers, about the fragility of our safety in situations we think we control. That first story leaves us with unanswered questions that will probably never be resolved. But our second story tonight takes a different approach to horror. Sometimes fear doesn't come from what happened to you, but from what almost happened. Sometimes the scariest moment of your life is when you realize you've been targeted by someone with truly dark intentions, and the only thing that saved you was circumstance. Our next story comes from a woman named Ariel, and it involves a drive home that turned into a chase for survival. Story 2, The Highway Stalker. My name is Ariel and I live in Georgia, not too far from the Alabama border. This incident happened several summers ago, during 4th of July weekend. I had driven out to a small town in Alabama for a cookout my college friend Isabel was throwing. You know the kind of gathering. Backyard setup, paper plates and plastic cups, bootleg fireworks that are probably illegal but everyone looks the other way on holidays, and way too much food for the number of people attending. It was genuinely one of the better nights I'd had in quite a while. Good people, good energy, kids running around with sparklers creating trails of light in the growing darkness. The party had that perfect summer evening atmosphere where everything feels warm and comfortable and safe. People were laughing, sharing stories. Music was playing at a reasonable volume so you could still have conversations. It was the kind of wholesome American celebration that you see in movies and think doesn't really exist anymore, but sometimes it does. I stayed later than I'd originally planned because I was having such a good time. I didn't leave until a little after 10 o'clock, and looking back, that timing was probably my first mistake. That part of Alabama gets real quiet once the sun goes down. We're not talking about suburbs with streetlights and late-night traffic. We're talking about genuine rural isolation, the kind where you can drive for 20 minutes without seeing another vehicle or any signs of human habitation. The drive back to my place in Georgia was going to take a little over 2 hours. I knew that going in, but I figured I'd just turn on some music, stay alert, and get home without any issues. I'd made similar drives plenty of times before without incident. Most of the route consisted of back roads, long, empty stretches of dark 2-lane roads with nothing but thick tree lines on either side, creating walls of darkness that seemed to absorb any light. Every now and then, I'd pass an old farmhouse with a single light on inside, or a tiny church with a gravel parking lot and a wooden sign out front. But for the most part, it was just darkness extending in every direction. Darkness and the narrow cone of my headlights, illuminating maybe 50 feet of road ahead, before everything dissolved back into black. I had music playing at a low volume, and I was still riding the good mood from the party. But I have to be honest, there's something about driving through places like that at night that gets under my skin, even when there's no rational reason to be afraid. I've always been somewhat scared of the dark, even as an adult. There's something primal about it, something that taps into ancient human fears about what might be lurking in spaces we can't see. So I was already a bit on edge, even before anything actually happened. About 30 minutes into the drive, I noticed a pair of headlights appear in my rearview mirror. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Someone else was obviously traveling the same back road, heading in the same general direction. It happens all the time, even on routes like this. But as minutes passed and those headlights stayed consistently behind me, I started paying more attention. It was a gray Nissan Altima. I could see it clearly anytime we passed under one of those rare overhead lights at small crossings. Nothing about the car itself seemed particularly unusual. It was a common model, maybe 10 or 15 years old based on the body style. But I did notice one odd detail. The bottom half of the car looked like it had been driving through mud. The lower panels and wheel wells were caked with dried dirt, clearly visible even in the limited light. That detail alone wasn't necessarily weird. We were in rural Alabama. Plenty of people drove down dirt roads and ended up with muddy vehicles. But after a while, maybe 10 or 15 minutes of this vehicle behind me, I started to realize something unsettling. No matter how much I adjusted my speed, that car matched me exactly. This wasn't just someone coincidentally going the same direction at a similar pace. This was something else, something deliberate. I decided to test my theory. I sped up a little, maybe 5 to 10 miles per hour faster than I had been going. Nothing dramatic, just enough to see if the car behind me was actively tracking my speed or just happened to be going around the same pace. The Altima sped up too, maintaining the exact same distance between us, so I tried the opposite. I tapped my brakes and let myself drift well below the speed limit, slowing down significantly. Again, the same result. The car behind me slowed down to match my new pace. The distance between us never changed. It was like there was an invisible rope connecting our two vehicles, keeping us in perfect formation. Now keep in mind that on roads like these, people pass each other all the time. It's not even illegal in most spots. The lines are dotted, not solid, and visibility is usually good enough that passing is safe and common. I moved slightly to the right a couple times to make it obvious that I was giving them space if they wanted to go around me. But they didn't. They just stayed exactly where they were, maintaining that 6 or 7 car lengths distance like they were measuring it scientifically. That's when I decided I needed to test them more aggressively. There was a random left turn coming up ahead, a small residential road with maybe 4 houses scattered on either side. It was the kind of turn that made absolutely no sense to take unless you specifically lived on that road or had business there. I took the turn with no hesitation, no turn signal, just jerking my wheel left at the last possible moment. I wanted to see if they'd follow. I wanted to be wrong about what I was starting to suspect. About 10 seconds later, the car turned and followed me down that same random road. At that point, there was no room for doubt anymore. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't someone happening to go the same direction. There was maybe a 0% chance they belonged on this road in the middle of nowhere. They were deliberately following me, tracking my movements, shadowing every decision I made. And I had no idea why. The fear hit me like a physical force. My heart started beating through my chest in that way it would if someone had an actual gun pointed at my head. I don't know why that's the analogy that came to mind, but that's exactly how it felt. Pure, primal terror. The kind that makes your hands shake and your breathing become shallow. I felt so helpless out there in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by darkness and isolation, with no way to know what this person wanted or why they had locked onto me. I just wanted to get somewhere safe, somewhere public with lights and other people, somewhere this person couldn't do whatever they were planning to do. And then, as if the universe was conspiring to make my nightmare worse, I heard that god-awful chime from my dashboard, the low fuel warning. I swear, I've never felt so completely powerless in my entire life. My car is old, a 2012 Toyota Corolla that's been through more than its fair share of mechanical problems over the years. Sometimes the gas light gives me a solid 20 miles of range. Sometimes I'm lucky to get 10 before the engine starts sputtering. And out there in that part of Alabama, there's not exactly a gas station on every corner. We're talking about legitimate rural emptiness, the kind where services are spread out by necessity, because there's simply not enough population density to support businesses. I pulled out my phone while keeping my eyes on the road and one hand on the wheel, and I looked up the nearest 24-hour gas station. It was over 8 miles away. 8 miles that might as well have been 80 given my fuel situation. I didn't know if I'd make it, but I didn't have a choice. I absolutely was not going to pull over, not with that car still tailing me. I thought about calling the police, but I dismissed the idea for a couple reasons. First, I was so far out in rural nowhere that cops would take forever to arrive anywhere. They'd probably have to dispatch from a station 30 or 40 minutes away. Second, and I'm embarrassed to admit this, there was a part of me that felt like calling the police would somehow make the danger more real. I know how irrational that sounds. I feel stupid even writing it down. But I'm trying to be completely honest about my thought process in that moment. Fear doesn't always bring out our most logical decision-making. The gas needle dropped to empty a couple minutes later, not just low, but completely on that E mark that means you're running on fumes and prayers. I tried desperately to stay calm, but I could feel myself starting to spiral into full panic. Every little sound the car made felt amplified, louder and more ominous. The road felt like it was stretching out infinitely ahead of me, each mile marker seeming farther apart than the last. I felt so stupid for being in this situation, for leaving the party so late, for not filling up my tank before making this drive, for everything. Terrible scenarios started flashing through my head about what would happen once my car ran out of gas. Would I try to run? Where would I even run to out here? Would I lock myself in the car and call the police? But then what if this person had a weapon? What if they could break the windows? The isolation that had just felt peaceful and rural during the daytime now felt like a trap designed specifically to make me vulnerable. There were no witnesses out here, no one to hear me scream. No security cameras to record what happened. But then, by some absolute miracle, I spotted the glow of the gas station sign up ahead in the distance. That familiar red and white logo looked like salvation itself. I almost started crying from pure relief. My eyes actually watered up. I took the turn into the parking lot hard, tires squealing slightly, pulling in with one quick motion to give myself maximum time to get out of the vehicle and run inside before that car could follow me in. And that's exactly what I did. The moment my car stopped moving, I jumped out and sprinted toward the entrance of the gas station, barely even shutting my car door behind me. My only thought was getting inside, getting around other people, getting to safety. From inside the store, standing next to the counter and trying to catch my breath, I could see the gray Nissan Altima through the window. It had followed me into the parking lot. It slowed to a stop at the edge of the lot, near the entrance but not quite pulling up to any of the pumps. The engine was still running. I could see the exhaust coming from the back, but no one got out. Whoever was inside just sat there, idling, like they were debating what to do next. Like they were weighing their options about whether to continue pursuing me now that I'd made it to a public space. For maybe 10 seconds, that car just sat there motionless. Those were the longest 10 seconds of my life. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. My hands were trembling. I was trying to decide what I should do if that person got out and came toward the store. Would the gas station employee help me? Would he call the police? Did he even understand the danger I was in? And then, suddenly, without warning, the car peeled off fast. The tires actually screeched as it accelerated away from the gas station, disappearing back down the same road we had come from, gone as suddenly and mysteriously as it had appeared. I told the gas station employee what had just happened, my words tumbling out in a rushed, frantic explanation that probably didn't make complete, coherent sense. This car had been following me for miles, matching my speed, tracking my movements, pursuing me to this location. He immediately offered to call the police for me, which I gratefully accepted. Even after talking to the police and giving them my statement, even after they told me they'd increase patrols in the area and watch for a gray Nissan Altima with mud on it, I still felt deeply unsettled. The officer who responded was professional and took my report seriously, but I could tell he'd heard stories like this before. He said it was probably someone intoxicated or on drugs who fixated on my vehicle for reasons only they understood. He said the fact that they didn't follow me into the gas station suggested they weren't committed to actually harming me, just following me for their own disturbed reasons. None of that made me feel better. I know compared to other horror stories, what happened to me might not seem like the scariest thing. I wasn't physically harmed. Nothing overtly violent occurred. But here's what people don't understand unless they've experienced it themselves. There's no explanation for what happened to me that doesn't involve whoever was driving that car having genuinely sinister intentions. You don't follow someone for 30+ minutes, tracking their every movement, mimicking their speed changes, pursuing them down random roads, unless you're planning to do something terrible. That feeling of pure fear, that primal terror of being hunted, I hope I never have to experience anything like that ever again. It's a feeling that stays with you, that changes how you see the world. I made it home that night and told myself I would never drive along rural back roads in the middle of the night ever again. I started planning my trips more carefully, making sure I always had a full tank of gas, always letting people know my exact route and expected arrival time. But the story doesn't end there. A few weeks later, something happened that made my stomach drop all over again and confirmed that my fear that night had been completely justified. I was sitting at home one evening watching the local news, just background noise really while I did other things around the house. A segment came on about two men who were suspects in a series of violent crimes across rural Alabama. Armed robbery, attempted murder, assault, carjacking, and a bunch of other charges. They showed a blurry still image from a security camera, and the news anchor mentioned that authorities believed the suspects had fled in a stolen gray Nissan Altima, last seen headed east toward Georgia. When I heard that description, when I saw that grainy image of that car, I just froze completely. My entire body went cold. That was who had been following me. I knew it in my gut with absolute certainty. There was no way to prove beyond doubt that it was the exact same vehicle and the exact same people, but I felt it in every fiber of my being. The timing lined up perfectly. The location lined up. The description of the car was essentially identical, down to the model and color. And these were violent criminals, people capable of armed robbery and attempted murder. People who absolutely would have harmed me if circumstances had been different. If I hadn't made it to that gas station. If my car had run out of gas on that empty road. If I had pulled over to see what they wanted. Any of those scenarios could have ended with me becoming another victim in their crime spree. I immediately called the police and told them my story about being followed that night. I gave them every detail I could remember: the route I'd been traveling, the approximate time, the description of the vehicle including the mud on the lower half. They took my statement and said it would be helpful to their investigation. That's when the full weight of it really hit me. My own failure to call the police sooner that night might have allowed these men to avoid capture for longer. They might have hurt other people in the days between my incident and their eventual apprehension, if they were even caught at all. I've never forgiven myself for not calling the police immediately when I first realized I was being followed. It's something I think about more often than I'd like to admit. The guilt sits with me, even though logically I know I was in survival mode and not thinking clearly. I never got an update from the police about whether those men were caught. I never heard anything else about the incident on the news, but I carry that night with me everywhere I go. It changed how I see the world. It changed how I assess danger. It changed everything. Conclusion. These two stories represent different flavors of horror, but they share a common thread. Sometimes the scariest experiences are the ones that never fully resolve, the ones where you never get the complete picture of what happened or why, the ones that leave you with questions that will haunt you for the rest of your life. The first story shows us that there are people out there capable of elaborate operations we can't even begin to understand. The second story reminds us that danger can find us anywhere, that predators are real and they're hunting. Stay safe out there, trust your instincts, and never forget that sometimes the only thing standing between you and disaster is a little bit of luck and a lot of awareness. Thanks for listening.